Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burgundy Zone. I am your host, Kyle, joined by my two co hosts, Goody and Hall. Title of today's episode is The Wildcard. And speaking to Wildcard Weekend and also the Wildcard in David Blough, as I like to call it, all you new fans out there. Obviously, David Blough is a big signing that took a lot of us by surprise. But to be able to recap, Goody, how was your weekend, brother?
The weekend was good. It was we had some good weather, temperature wise, so just being able to kind of get out and about, not feel that cringe of the crisp winter air. So it was nice to just kind of do some stuff with the fam. Got to enjoy that wild card weekend, which was like it was awesome. Obviously Washington not being invited to the dance is always going to be a bummer, but it was still really good football this weekend. So I kind of enjoyed that sitting on the couch and chasing after the kids and stuff. But all in all, good weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole playoff games all weekend were fantastic. A really good batch of games went down to the wire that you would absolutely love. Obviously, Josh Allen and company pulled it out. Ending last night with Philly getting beat. Goody, I'm sure you remember this from when we recorded. And I said on the last episode is like, there's this lingering possible thunderstorm over the heads of Philadelphia if they were to lose this game, with them having to speculate the what ifs of starting their starters week 17, week 18 against us and ultimately losing that game. And now you have that what if game all off season long of if you actually did play those starters and you won that game, then maybe you would have had a better matchup and a win there. But the entire weekend was phenomenal. Puka Nakua himself is just a freak athlete. Good seeing Cam Curl and Emmanuel Forbes again. But Hall, how was your weekend, brother?
Yeah, just same as y'all. Just a pretty good weekend. Just watched some football, watched some good football outside of the Sunday night football game last night. That was kind of like a not really a one-sided game, but it wasn't as good as the other games throughout the weekend that were basically came down to like the final drive, final play of the game type thing. So yeah, just week the weather wasn't that bad out here as well, so just chilled out, watched some football, and you know I'm here now.
Yeah, it was surprising. I'm sorry that the Packers couldn't get it done. I was rooting for them. I've seen all the AI edits of Ben Johnson punching Matt LaFleur at their handshake and everything of the sort, which is it's good for the sport to have a rivalry. Not to mince words or anything. And Caleb Williams with the cheese grater. I thought that was a new one. That was a new one for sure, man. I've seen like trash being talked, but like you don't talk that kind of trash in the regular season. You do wait for playoffs for that. And an in division rival, I can't hate against it, man. Like that's how you're supposed to be doing business.
Yeah,
For
I
sure.
mean, yeah, I saw DJ Moore or whoever it was. I think it was DJ Moore. He was wearing the cheese grater like little foam hat after the game a couple weeks ago, the overtime win. So yeah, I mean, rivalries is what makes sports so great. That's what we love about sports is what goes into a rivalry, not just the players on the field, just not just the teams, the cities, but the fans. It's all just one big rivalry, and I love it. And hopefully, we're on the verge of getting back to that in the NFC East. I know, obviously, on Twitter, there's a little bit of rivalry in the fan base between Eagles and the Commanders right now, but we go back and forth. Not we, like as in me and like us, but like other
It's the
people in the fan
entire
base.
NFC East, dude.
Yeah. But like the Cowboys and the Giants are kind of like they're like the little brothers right now. Like we're just like, yeah, you guys are cute, whatever. Yeah, the big boys are talking over here right now. But yeah. So we all love rivalries, and hopefully, we're getting back to that soon.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's funny in that Eagles game, I saw Saquon on the sideline because I was like vacuuming my house and I heard them say that on the Dallas Goddard touchdown that they had thrown a flag for illegal man downfield. And I didn't see the play, mind you. And so I was thinking, I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome. So happy to hear that. And then I turn the vacuum off and I hear them saying that they picked up the flag. And I was listening to Dean Blandino trying to explain that you're allowed to block downfield. And like I was like, wait a minute, what in the Vegas is happening right now? Like that is a pretty clear-cut rule. You can't be more than a yard past the line of scrimmage before the pass is thrown. Either that happened or it didn't. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, what is going on here? But ultimately, they could blame A.J. Brown all they want. It comes down to the penalties, their lack of offensive line production this season. They took a major step back, and I knew that they were going to point blame at Patullo and A.J. Brown, but that was the least of the problems of last night, in my personal opinion. I'm sorry that they had to join us down in Cancun, but look, man, friendly faces is always good to see, you know. Now,
Gotta love it.
wanted to talk about the recent news. I am, for one, I was surprised that Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt were let go, essentially. Like Joe Witt, not so much. You kind of knew that was coming, but you thought that he would also be retained in some capacity, right? With Cliff altogether, I would say it was very surprising to me to see how it played out. What would you say to that, Goody?
Yes, I was not expecting Cliff Kingsbury to be let go um at the end of this season. Now we all know that a lot of the entire franchise regressed this year, based on however many factors you want to add up into that. But ultimately, it didn't feel like Cliff earned his way out. So it was surprising to see that. Knowing what he's able to do with a healthy roster on offense, healthy quarterback, healthy weapons, we saw the pudding last year, right? So for us to have this kind of season and then for him to be gracefully let go, definitely caught me by surprise. Um, am I upset about it? Nah, I'm not upset about it. I know that change needed to be made. We all know that across the board. So whether or not the offense was the problem or not, which we all know wasn't necessarily, but changes had to be made, and that's what's going on. When I saw the headline of him leaving, I was like, okay, here we go. You know, the race is on. And for us to kind of position ourselves to
Right.
get a offensive coordinator in here as soon as we did, just gave me like confidence. You know, that door was open and closed very quickly. No conversation. We're about business. So I kind of like that approach, but definitely caught off guard slightly by Cliff being let go.
Yeah, like we were at the Colonel's house, so we were just hanging out, celebrating and having a good time on Friday, having some drinks, and he was asking about OCs. You know, I brought up Mike McDaniel. I really thought that was a good idea. He has play calling experience. He's got the relationship with Dan Quinn, but ultimately, where the deciding factor there is the relationship with Jaden. And as much as Mike McDaniel had that relationship with, like, kind of admiring Jaden from afar, it still wasn't as on hand as David Blough. And like right after we have this conversation on Friday, it gets released that we had hired David Blough. And my brother had texted me saying, you know, I'm kind of worried that this is going to piss off Jaden because he was close with Cliff. And I was like, look, pal, like, honestly, I don't know if Jaden is going to be like overly pissed about it. Like, obviously, he could have a sticking point to say, I really like Cliff. It's not going to be fun to watch him go. But you can kind of see where if you as a quarterback are sitting there saying, is Cliff's system going to help me reach my ceiling? And I don't know if that horizontal passing game, that short subtle stuff with an every other time randomly throwing downfield, is that really going to maximize Jaden's strengths? Because if we look back to LSU, he was an absolute sniper, hitting downfield constantly. And that you haven't seen that all that much, especially this year. Obviously, he hasn't played. But overall, I would venture to say that this was a welcomed move, and it's just surprising that they made the move before Cliff went somewhere else to make it easier. So it's pretty obvious that David Blough was being highly coveted and highly sought after by other teams, and they had to make a move quickly. I said this to my brother. We should have seen that based on their interviews that they had leading up. They were kind of getting their ducks in a row in order to make this move immediately, and ultimately they did. We could talk about what we think of David Blough, but ultimately I was surprised by just how quick the process truly was.
Yeah, I don't think I was as surprised that he got let go. I think, like you said, I think in the quickness in which the process kind of went down. I think that's what was more surprising
Thank you.
about the whole situation. But I mean, I know a lot of people are like, we're killing Diana Rossini because of whatever reason. She used to work in this market, whatever, blah blah blah. So people always, whenever she has information or a report, everyone just goes to Twitter, goes to social media, and kills her and says she don't know what she's talking about, blah blah blah. But once you heard that report about kind of the rift between him and Clear, or him and AP, or him and DQ, whatever it may be, scheme differences, philosophy differences, I looked at it from a standpoint of they were giving him, which I mean, this is kind of how it played out, but I looked at it from a standpoint of they were giving him the ultimatum of like, hey, like, let's evolve the offense a little bit more. Let's do a little bit more traditional type NFL things and more what the NFL's doing nowadays, more like the Shanahan, the West Coast, Ben Johnson type of like offense, basically the under center play action, which is taking over
Right.
the league by storm right now. And we know this going back to Arizona when the Cliff was a thing and how he never adjusted, that Cliff believes in his system and he's going to run his system. So for him to be like, no, I'm not going to change my system up. And look, he has data points to point to say like, hey, my system works in the NFL, even though it is different for everyone else's and whatever it may be. But I just think for the long term betterment of Jaden, like I think like you go back to Caleb Williams, like, and against the Packers, and I think pregame they were talking about how they were talking about Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and like the marriage between them, blah blah blah. And someone said that they were talking to Caleb, and they said that Caleb said that Ben Johnson changed my life because if you go back to college,
Told him to
he
stop
was an
painting his
RPO.
fingernails.
Yeah, he was an RPO guy. He was like a spread offense guy. He was never really under center, go through your progressions and like actually played the position of quarterback from the pocket type of guy. And I think when he said he changed my life, I think he meant like he's coaching him up like as hard as anyone's ever coached him in probably in his entire life. He's holding him accountable, whereas I'm going to assume other coaches are probably like, hey, this guy's so talented. I'm kind of let him kind of freelance and free range. And you're kind of seeing the results. I know, obviously, Caleb is like lowest like completion percentage in the league. He misses the easy passes. But you can see the growth from like week one up until the playoffs right now. He's definitely taking those steps.
That throw on the run to his right, where
that was crazy.
Defender was at his feet. He chucks it over the head of the DB into the basket.
Drops a dime too.
Absolute dime. You got to give Caleb credit for that. Like that was the eliteness of Caleb coming out of college of what he could do outside of the structure, right?
Exactly.
And you're saying Ben is helping him inside that structure.
Yeah, I say all that to say that, and we already know Jaden can play inside structure. We've seen that time in, time out all of last year and a little bit this year. But my point of all that is to say that not that Cliff wasn't coaching him hard or like wasn't holding him accountable and stuff like that. I'm just saying that like in order for Jaden to grow and get the best out of Jaden, he's going to need a coach that's going to be a little bit more traditional and a little bit more like I guess like
what
NFL
do you mean by traditional?
As far as like under center and the whole play action type of thing. Like I don't mean like traditional as far as like playing the quarterback position because we know Jaden can do that. I mean traditional as far as like the offense evolving and getting more under center, more play action, more middle of the field type throws, that type of stuff. And then obviously the run game, which everyone knows like a defensive coach always wants to lean on the run game. But if you go to Kevin O'Connell, if you go to Sean McVay, like Kyle Shanahan, Ben Johnson, all those guys, and even Cliff's offense to a certain extent, all of it starts with the run game. And I know like a couple of people brought this up as well with Cliff's running game. It's not really married to his passing game. So like a lot of the runs that he was calling were just kind of runs. There was nothing really to build off of the run. It was just like, hey, we're going to run this run just for the sake of running it. So I say a lot to say that I wasn't surprised that they let him go because if you just read the tea leaves, people like John Keim and whatnot have always been saying from the get-go that they want to get a little bit more traditional. And if you know Cliff, going back to his Arizona days, he's always believed in his system, but he doesn't really want to change his system up because that's what he runs. That's what he likes to do. So I wasn't really surprised, but like I said, I was more surprised about how quickly the process kind of played out.
I don't know. I don't know if this was based on future. Like, I don't know if them sitting down to say, would you be able to do this and that? I think that this was probably something that happened over the course of the season. And like coaching football myself, I've seen strifes develop with coaching staffs through a losing season. I see what kind of issues arise where coaches want to make their point to say, this is what I want to do, this is what should happen, and the head coach saying, well, no, this is my team, this is what's going to happen. And then you have the GM who himself is very prideful and good at what he does, and there could be strife there. And that's where I think a lot of this derives from the older players playing, especially offensively, where we saw Zach Ertz in front of Ben Sinnott, and we got to see Ben Sinnott just a little bit more, and we wanted to see more of Colson Yankoff as well. But the whole C-Rod, Bill kind of aspect, and I think ultimately there were disagreements because I've seen the argument being made that the way that Cliff played the offense in the no huddle, which was obviously last year, was monumental. It was critical to what Washington was doing offensively to keep defenses off balance. Yes, it does keep defenses off balance, but it also puts a lot of pressure on your defense in order to get off the field quickly because your drives are going very quick, and so you're not soaking up all that much time of possession, so that way your defense isn't. And when you have an older defense, man, that can be a killer at times. So was it ultimately helping, right? And it pains me to say because even all this season we have been saying the offense ultimately isn't the issue. The issue always has been this entire season was the defense just being blown wide open, and there was no complementary football. And a lot of those issues you could point blame onto the defense. But ultimately, if you're looking at this saying we have 3 more years with Jaden on his rookie deal, we need to be able to maximize his ability the most. And I think the best way to do that is get a young, unique mind that has shown the ability to call plays, good ones, and that has a good relationship with Jaden, who knows Jaden. And that makes a whole lot of sense to me. We had this question asked to us not long ago of who would you want to see successing Cliff if he were to leave as a coach. And we did talk about the I'm pretty sure we used the verbiage wild card in David Blough and saying that could be the guy. We don't know, but that could be the one that throws everyone to the side, and ultimately it was. And I think it says a lot about Anthony Lynn as well. So, like, this would keep together a lot of the coaching staff. I know that Washington interviewed Drew Terrell. If you guys remember him, Terry McLaurin loved him as the wide receivers coach. I think he's with Arizona right now. We also interviewed him, and but obviously they wanted to do their due diligence, but they knew who they wanted. Like they knew they wanted to retain David Blough, and it does bring similarities to the Shanahan coaching tree leaving here, as to say, yeah, we want to be able to gamble on this, like the Colonel. He used the word gamble on it, and that's why I'm saying he is the wild card, ultimately in all of this, and to see if he can call an entire offense for 17 games, and that begs the question. So how confident are you in that, Goody?
Yeah, I was just the words confident. The reaction that I've gotten has been so mixed off of this decision, and honestly, just based off of the quickness and efficiency in terms of doing due diligence and extending interviews out, but having it buttoned down within a couple of days, that should breathe confidence to your fan base, saying, hey, like, we're not looking around, we're not curious, we're not lost in the sauce. We know exactly what we want, and we're just going to close the door on that. Like, if anything, that should give you a ton of confidence, knowing like, yeah, this is the move they made, and they didn't even hesitate. There was no pump fake. They just got the ball and they shot it. And that's what a confident basketball player does. They don't sit there and should I shoot it? Should I not? Should I pat? They get that ball, they shoot it, and they get down the court and get on defense. So that's what we're doing right now. We shot the ball, and we made it in. We got our OC. Now it's time to get back on defense, literally and figuratively, with our defensive coordinator pick. So I like it.
And you would have to imagine that the move with David Blough would ultimately mean that Blough wants to bring in somebody for offensive line, because they also let go of Bobby Johnson. So if they that was one that everyone kind of scratched their head at, because the offensive line was probably the most consistent all year long along the football team, ultimately. And to let go of Bobby Johnson, it was a head scratcher for a lot of people. and myself included. But it begs the question: does David Blough have somebody in mind? And would love to be able to go down the alley of finding out who that guy could be to come here for the offensive line, and what kind of scheme are they going to be running, especially in the running style, and finding out what we're going to be doing. Because if Bobby Johnson was good at what David Blough wanted to do, then he would be here still. So obviously that's a big question. But how confident are you, Hall, and David Blough with this offense?
Yeah, the Bobby Johnson one, like you were talking about, that was kind of
What's up, dog? Tired? Sorry.
Definitely threw everyone through a loop as
Oh,
well.
boy.
But yeah, I don't know. I heard a couple people say that Bobby Johnson got on their radar, like DQ and AP's radar, because of Cliff. Like him and Cliff had a kind of like a relationship or whatever, and Cliff knew that Bobby Johnson could basically block up the scheme that he wants to run and whatnot. So I think, to your point, I think maybe they do have someone in mind for like the new O-line coach, but I'm also was thinking about it like Bobby Johnson's been in multiple systems before, so like why could he not be able to like learn this system, coach up this system and whatnot? But who knows? But as far as like the confidence of David Blough, I would say if I was going 1 out of 10 right now, I'd probably put it at like a 5, just because, like you said, he's the wild card. You don't really know what you're getting. I know since he's stepped foot in the building, everyone's been talking very highly of him going, and just whenever, obviously, he was on Hard Knocks as well with the Lions, and he was one of the feature guys because he was like the third string, kind of like practice squad backup quarterback or whatever. But he seemed like a very smart guy, very intelligent guy, football knowledge wise. And I know people have talked about how competitive he is, which is obviously like a theme of DQ and AP and what they want to build their organization based off of. And like you guys talked about, he has a relationship with Jaden, so like a lot of people forget, like you talked about, a lot of people are like, who's going to be the next guy to, if Cliff leaves, to succeed Cliff. And a lot of people brought up Tavita Pritchard just because he was the quarterback's coach. He was working so closely with Cliff. He was working so closely with Jaden. But by him going off, getting the head coaching job at Stanford, I think that kind of made them pivot to like, okay, who's the next guy up? And a lot of people have kind of assumed it would be Brian Johnson just because he has the experience calling the plays. He has the assistant coach head title. Or it'd be a guy like Anthony Lamb just because, again, Dan Quinn going into a pivotal year, hey, we got to get somebody that has experience in this, and not to like save my job, but we need someone that's going to be able to hit the ground running type of thing. And you don't know what you're getting with David Blough. You don't know if he's going to be able to hit the ground running and have this offense. I'm not going to say humming like week one, but you don't know if they're going to be functioning as well as they should be by week one. And it's definitely going to be a gap between like going from his role now to like actually drawing up an offense, making a game plan, calling this play, that play, because obviously everyone knows play calling becomes like a field type of thing over time where you're like, okay, you kind of know what the defense is about to run on this down and distance, and you got your play call like sheet like ready to go, like, okay, I'm gonna dial up this play. But
Okay.
I do think that to start off, it might be a little rocky. It might be up and down, like I know he'll have Anthony Lynn, he'll have Brian Johnson, he'll have other guys on the staff, probably hopefully to kind of guide him and help him out along the way. But I'm sure it'll be rocky here and there. It might start off rocky. I heard somebody say that even whenever, I think it might have been Jay Gruden, even whenever Sean McVay took over play calling duties for himself, it took a while for him to kind of get his feet under him and kind of gain a feel for like how to call plays and what to do. And he's one of the best in the game, obviously, right now. So I think that it could start off rocky, but I think hopefully by midseason, end of the year, he's gained his footing. He's gained a little bit more confidence in his play calling. And I mean, that's when you want your team to be playing their best football. So hopefully it all kind of coincides at one in next season, and they kind of hit their stride at some point and the offense starts to get up and running. But yeah, he's going to have to – I respect DQ for making this decision because he could have took the safe route, the easy route.
Right.
Hired a guy with experience and just been like, you know what? I'm going to let them run the offense and hopefully everything pans out well. But he's taking a risk. He's going to go out. If he does go out, he's going to go out on his terms, the way he wants to do it with his guys. So I respect that part of it. But, yeah, David Blough, I like the hire. Obviously, for a team like Detroit with all those weapons and the pedigree for them to be like a Super Bowl contender, they want to get back to the Super Bowl contender. For them to be holding him in high regard, shows you that, okay, if a team like the Lions, who just kind of like us, is going into a pivotal year of like, hey, we need to bounce back, get to the playoffs, maybe get back to the NFC Championship game, for them to be like, hey, we want that guy to maybe come call our plays, I think that shows that he is ready for the job, and it's just going to take some time for him to really get into a rhythm of things.
Absolutely, it's going to take a while, and hopefully the VR helps him out just a little bit as much as it helps out Jaden with calling plays, and maybe he's got something come down the pipeline. Not really sure, but this question by the Colonel Goody, he says, please give us a data dump with everything you know about David Blough. I'm hearing some pretty great things about him pedigree-wise. Please talk me out of being skeptical about hiring a 30-year-old as our OC who has exactly 2 years of NFL coaching experience. That's a valid question and concern.
Yeah, and I understand the concern, but you gotta. It's hard to really hear, these cries from the fan base in terms of needing, assurance and comfort. When you look at the graphic that is infamously known for all of the talent that we let walk out of this building, how could you sit here as a burgundy and gold fan and even think twice to really worry that much about it? Do you want to be on that end of that graphic with another superstar, NFL-minded coach? Do you want that? Like, is the proof not in the pudding how many times we've let that happen to us? All of these guys are head coaches. All of these guys have had a lot of success, and we have another opportunity. It seems like Washington has to be the hub of like young, intuitive talent because we're just out here pushing them out. So in terms of his background, I'm kind of learning it on the fly as well. We do know that he was a NFL quarterback. He worked with Ben Johnson, Cliff Kingsbury, played with them. Besides that, all the reporting goes back to show that the kid is, he's dialed in when it comes to football. He knows his stuff, and he obviously has something unique, whereas other heads in the NFL are, kind of they're basically certifying him as definitely an up and coming talent in the league. So in terms of having to convince you to not be concerned, scared, worried, just look at Sean McVay, LaFleur, Kevin O'Connell, who else? The list goes on. Mike McDaniel. Just take a step back and look at that perspective and think for yourself. We're not letting this one get out. And then when kickoff happens next year, sit back and enjoy the show.
Yeah, and so what I would say, Colonel, is kick your feet up. Take off the slippers, take off the shoes, grab yourself a nice cold beverage, sit back and enjoy, because David Blough in his playing career is similar to what Tom Brady went through at Michigan, where every single year he had to compete in order to get those starting reps. So he redshirted his first year at Purdue, came in, won a couple games, but ultimately the one theme in his career is the games that he starts, they typically lose. But it's not like it's because of him. He does a fantastic job. He threw for a school record of over 527 yards in one game at Purdue. I will give him a tip of the cap to him for beating Ohio State in a huge upset. So credit to David Blough for being able to do that. And that kind of carried over to his NFL career, where he was an undrafted with Cleveland, gets plucked to Detroit's practice squad, and then from there he's get thrusted into playing because of the injuries to quarterback with the Detroit Lions at the time. It's when they had Matthew Stafford. I think their top two quarterbacks got injured, and he actually came in and did a damn good job, which obviously got the eyes of everyone else. So he did some shuffling, and then ultimately the same thing happened with him and Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona, where Kyler goes down, backup goes down, and so they have to plug somebody off the street. Well, here he comes, and he does actually a pretty good job of doing it. The other background is that his wife is Melissa Gonzalez, who is an Olympic athlete, track star, whose brother, his wife's brother, is Christian Gonzalez, who plays corner for the New England Patriots. I'm just saying, this would be one heck of a way to right a wrong if old boy David could talk to Christian Next time the contract comes around, I said, "Don't sign that, man. I want you to come over and hang out with your sister a lot. Come play with us over here in DC and right that wrong for me, please." I still haven't gotten over that. But ultimately, I understand what you're saying about the 2 years of experience. That is a legit thing. We know that he called the play. He wrote up, designed the play against Philly, the touchdown throw to Jamison Crowder. We know about that. Making up one play in a series of a game is massively different than coming up with a game plan, a call sheet, having it throughout the entire game, of having a good plan involved and executing that plan with the offense. It's a hefty thing to put on a guy. And obviously, him being young, that's where the skepticism comes in. He doesn't have that much experience with it. But you can reside in the fact that you know that they've been with this guy. The fact that Detroit is trying so hard to pluck him would ultimately tell you something. Because what happened with Dan Quinn up in Detroit? They took away play calling duties from their OC. Dan Campbell takes over. They do pretty well with it with Dan Campbell. But ultimately, things fall off, right? So they're looking for a good play caller to bring in this rejuvenate that offense. And that's what they were trying to get with David Blough. And luckily, we were able to pull the trigger. So what I would say is your skepticism is warranted. You know that this is a gamble. But, you can't be shy with it. If you're trying to attack success, this is the way to do it. And Dan Quinn has a history with doing this. He did it with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta after he was at Cleveland, I believe. He plucked him in to bring as OC. And look, Kyle Shanahan's been on a tear ever since, even at Washington, he was on a tear. So I think ultimately we just got to reside in the fact that Dan Quinn does know talent from that perspective, especially with coaching young talent. And which is very funny because Dan Quinn is very loyal to his older players. He'd rather play older players from what we believe, but he's willing to go down the route of hiring a young offensive-minded guy to call plays, even though he might be brand new to it and it's a gigantic gamble. Obviously, Dan Quinn is somebody that believes heavily in a lot in David Blough. And so, look, I think the skepticism is warranted. You should keep the skepticism. Because ultimately, that's when Washington does their best, is when we are really skeptical about what could happen. When we get tough-chested, when we get overconfident about our team, is typically when bad things happen. So it's probably good to be skeptical.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, you guys pretty much hit on a lot of the points I was going to make. I'd say another reason to kind of hopefully calm your skepticism down, which, again, you should have a little bit of skepticism because this is an inexperienced guy going into a situation that is very pivotal for a lot of people in that organization, including AP, DQ, a lot of those people on the coaching staff.
Don't go too hard into that. We got a question pertaining to that.
Gotcha. All right, bet you. But yeah, it's pivotal for a lot of people on that team, roster-wise, front office-wise, coaching-wise. So they're putting a lot on his plate and a lot of jobs. Technically, it could be depending on if he does a good job or not. But I would say that this is a guy that's been in the building for, like I said, for 2 years now. They know how smart he is. They know how hard of a worker he is. Obviously, he's been around Cliff and guys like that who have put together game sheets, put together game plans and whatnot. So hopefully he's kind of been absorbing that.
And it's good. And I always cut you off whenever you start talking. I'm sorry. But to your point of having Anthony Lynn there and Brian Johnson definitely would help a young guy get acclimated to that process and the growing pains of it. To your point, sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, and I was gonna make that point as well. He has two guys that have done it before. They can help him out throughout the week, help him out on game days, and on top of that, guys like John Keim, Nicky Javala, who cover the team, who are like the more trusted, credentialed people that follow the team. They were saying that it was David Blough as in like number one, and then Mike McDaniel number two. So like that should give you a little bit of solace of being like, okay, it was always going to be either David Blough or Mike McDaniel. And if a guy like John Keim, who's very close to the situation, was saying his whole time, his feel was it was David Blough and then Mike McDaniel, that just goes to show you that, like, obviously if Mike McDaniel was available, then obviously he would have been the candidate. He would have probably been the guy. But I think that they were looking at it hopefully like at a long-term type of view of if they do have success this year, Mike McDaniel would be a one and done gone, and then you got to find a whole new succession plan or a whole new offense for Jaden going into year 4. Whereas a guy like David Blough, who comes from multiple systems, can kind of formulate his own scheme, his own system, can also hopefully, depending on what happens with everyone going forward, will be able to grow with Jaden going forward. He's not just going to be a one and done type of guy. This will be the OC for hopefully the next, at minimum, 2, maybe 3 years while Jaden's still on his rookie contract. And then hopefully maybe he goes and blossoms into a head coach or another role. But yeah, I would say that one other, like I said, one other point to kind of ease your worries would be that he was always either candidate number 1 or candidate number 2 in their eyes for the position.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of hindsight with a lot of those corrections. The way, look, I love John. I do, but he does do that sometimes. Now,
Yeah, but he was always from the get-go. He was steadfast.
he was
in saying
including
that.
David Blough in a lot of those hypotheticals.
I think that if it was up to them, if they gave DQ, AP, all those guys truth serum, they would probably say, hey, yeah, we kind of wanted to wait to see what Mike was going to do, kind of slow play it, and maybe hopefully we can get Mike McDaniel, lure him here. But the guy's getting 3, 4, 5 head coaching interviews. He's getting the OC job or OC interview with the Detroit Lions. I'm sure he has other interviews for offensive coordinator lined up. So, did you really want to wait on a guy like Mike McDaniel, hoping that you can be able to lure him here,
And then lose out on David Blough.
Meanwhile, you lose out on David Blough to Detroit or something like that, and then next thing you know, you're kind of scrambling, and next thing, like, you know what I'm saying, like, then everyone's gonna be pointing the finger at like they didn't have a plan, they don't know what they're doing, blah 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 blah, and then the seats will be even hotter and even louder for those guys over there in Ashburn. So
Everybody's already complaining. Now, this next question, Hall, I'll go to you first. This is from Tony Franchise on Twitter. Thank you, Tony. His question is this season coming up a make or break season for Dan Quinn and Adam Peters, or just DQ?
So Adam Peters wise, I would say that more times than not, the general manager kind of outlasts the head coach, at least for the first go around. Obviously, there's a lot of situations where they come in together, they don't have success, they all get fired together. But just looking at the track record of a guy like Josh Harris going back to the 76ers, I know he was like part of the process. Basketball is different, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But he gave his guys a little bit of free range to get things right, corrected. And then eventually, whenever things weren't going how he wanted it, he got rid of the head coach, but he kept the general manager. So, and then that happens a lot around the NFL as well, like where the general manager will kind of outlast the head coach, and then they let the new general manager pick the new head coach and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I would say that AP probably, for the most part, is going to be safe. I'm not going to say no matter what because who knows what's going to happen. But I would say AP is probably a little bit more safe than DQ going into next year. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. He went 12-5, then 5-12. He's back down to 500. You get off to a slow start. There's going to be a lot of noise, a lot of chatter, not just locally, but nationally probably. I'm sure he'll be on that list of coaches going into the season. Like, he'll be number 3 or 4 on the list of like coaches on the hot seat more than likely. So I would say that you can look at it from that lens, or you can look at it from the lens of, okay, they clearly consulted Josh Harris about the OC hire. They know that he's a young guy. It's going to take a little bit of time for him to grow into the role. So maybe they're looking at it like, okay, pending some ridiculously horrible collapse again next year, where they go 5-12, 4, and whatever it may be. We're going to give DQ that 4th year, and then hopefully David Blough will grow into his role, and the offense and the team will grow throughout the season. And then maybe year 4, they say, okay, this is your hot seat year, and this is when you got to get it done. But I look at it from the other side of the lens where, yes, this is probably his last chance to kind of get it right. And hopefully he does, because I like DQ. And hopefully, I mean, look, it's really going to depend on who he hires at defensive coordinator and if they can turn that around. And it's going to rely on how quickly can David Blough grow into that role of offensive coordinator and get Jaden back on track, get this offense back on track. And kind of be the pulse and the heartbeat of this team. So I say all that to say that, yes, I do think that DQ and this coaching staff, for the most part, are probably going into the season on a warm seat, and AQ is probably a little bit less warm, but yeah.
AQ.
AP, DQ, DK,
Yeah, I don't know.
AD,
I don't know.
DQ.
I understand. I understand why you brought them together and combined them. It does make sense. Without a doubt, DQ is going to be. It's a make or break year for DQ. You can make the argument for this season that the injuries played a part, things went awry, but these were your selections for candidates, and so it's a bad look ultimately. And with AP, it's kind of hard to be able to distinguish if AP would be on the hot seat or not, because we all know the old saying, crap rolls downhill, right? Well, right now the crap rolled all the way down the hill to the coordinators. Next stop is the next stop up, which is going to be head coach. Well, once that head coach is gone, if things still continue, then it's on AP. So regardless, you could say it's a fraction-based system kind of, Tony, where it's like right now, AP most likely he's not on the hot seat on like a 40% basis. But based on if this continue, you keep trimming the leaves, at some point you're going to get to the bark. You're going to get to the stem, and you're going to have to make that decision. And so is it ultimately next year? No. But it's getting close. And things have to start changing, and you have to start getting more production. And in honesty, the team president, Mark Klaus, he's strictly business. He is not overseeing really the football operations. It's AP. So that's a huge block. And that's where Josh Harris, I would imagine, would reside more trust and confidence in, and the fact that this is somebody that's running your entire football operation. And so you got to think about it from that lens, that being able to replicate that, get somebody in here who can do that, is a tough task. So if you really, and I think he truly believes in AP and bringing him here, but ultimately it's on DQ. And what you would be hoping for is that David Blough would have a good year next year. You'd see some production, you'd see some upgrading going on in productivity. But at what point is it going to become where David Blough is getting the head coaching interviews? And then based on the team's success, what are you going to do with DQ? And that's where that kind of issue lies for DQ is that going to happen at the end of next season? Is that going to happen the following season like Hall talked about in year 4? That's the big question, is when that is going to rear its ugly head. But hopefully Washington is winning by then, and everyone can chill out a little bit less on it. I ultimately, personally, do not care what they do at DC. I saw David Harrison talk about Graham, the DC from the Raiders. His kind of defense with 4-man rushing. This season we prioritized a lot of 3-man rushing and put a lot of stress on linebackers, and this would allow Frankie Louvu to roam free in his article. And I ultimately disagree with David Harrison. In reality, Frankie Louvu should not be roaming free. Frankie Louvu should be on the damn line rushing, because that's what he's really good at. And that's what we need to be really going and gearing towards. Frankie Louvu is at a point in his career where you should not be trying to convert him into a cover linebacker. That's not what he is doing. You take the chains off of him, and you let him go after the quarterback in these kind of not sophisticated, but confusing style way of blitzing. You saw the 49ers do this last night. On the last play of the game against Philly, they stacked up.
Get someone that's more exotic.
Stacked up everybody on the D-line. You didn't know who was rushing. The play clock was running out for Philly. They were kind of rushing themselves to be able to get the snap off, so they couldn't see what defense they were in, which confused them, which forced Jalen Hurts to throw into triple coverage. That's the sort of thing we should be going towards. It should not be this kind of cookie-cutter type of aspect where it's like, oh, well, now we're going to have prioritized 4 down linemen. Well, Patrick Graham, the DC from the Raiders, also had Max Crosby. I ultimately don't care what they do at DC until you get a D-end in here who can be very good, because I've seen people talk about Jim Schwartz. I've seen people talk about Graham. And it's like, do we have a rusher like that? That they can replicate that same defense? Because without that rusher, you are doing exactly what you're doing with Dan Quinn when he first got here. You're saying, look what he did with that Dallas defense. They had Micah, and you're completely ignoring that fact to say, okay, we'll do it with this defense that doesn't have those tools. It doesn't make sense to me. So ultimately, until you get that edge position, the DC is not going to matter. Sorry, Goody.
No, you're fine. In terms of being on the hot seat, for DQ and Adam Peters. The way I see it is, I'm not going to say that they're on a hot seat if this season does not go well. I understand this is a very results driven business. I mean, most of life is not even just NFL alone, but based off of you have to kind of really take a step back and just think about where we are today and where we were about 2 years ago, and 30 years before that. So you can't be too quick to just, lash out and burn the city down. And, you got to kind of have a little bit of take a deep breath, step back and look at it. I feel like if you get to the point where if this season isn't, next season, excuse me, isn't as flashy and fly as season one, but nowhere near as tarnished as season two, there's no reason to can Quinn or question Peters. I feel like you have to be able to do this. Stick to your plan and stick to your plan. If the plan was to have these guys come in and vitalize this organization from top to bottom, let them do that. Obviously, again, results are very, very important in this. But, based off the first year success with these same people in the building calling the shots day to day, it's hard to just move off of that, and to put the timer on DQ this early, I don't think you can do that. The way that he has, changed the locker room, players that want to play for him, there's a lot more value in what he brings as a leader of men. And of course, David Blough not being a player anymore, he's still only 30 years old. There's players on this roster that are older than him. So for him to have DQ as his head coach and for him to be at youth, at inexperience, I feel like there's no better position for David Blough in terms of him to be in, having a support system in Dan Q himself. So I think everybody needs to kind of just relax. I understand, the skepticism of this young, guy coming in and getting the keys to the offense, but we're in good hands, man. You can't put anybody in the hot seat yet. If this happens and you start to see, fallout and words of utters from locker room whispers and rumors, and when all that stuff starts to happen, then you can assume that Quinn has lost control of something. And then that's when you can maybe dive into that and have that conversation. But until then, I feel like you just got to keep your foot on the gas.
Well, and to Tony's question, like he talked about AP, right? Well, AP is also wanting to prove that his system and his drafting is working, right? And that could have been one of the roadblocks in the younger guys not getting more reps, in the sense of saying, I need to be able to prove what I'm doing is doing well too, but you won't allow my pieces to get in there and help this offense ultimately. And that's one of the reasons why they moved on from Cliff, which brings up the question of defensively, that's the same thing. And having Mikey playing a position he really is not very good at, having Jordan McGee getting slighted in reps and everything, but obviously they played Trey Amos. But to that point, what were you saying, Hall?
No, I was gonna say, well, first of all, to that point, I do believe that the defensive coordinator like hire, although it's not important. I do think that, to your point, it's more. I think the defense is more of a Jimmy's and Joe's situation right now than it is X's and O's. Like, they just need better players on defense, and then the scheme hopefully would take care of itself. And then the coordinator and the coaching puts the cherry on top of, like, okay, now we're going to put him in the best position. And then when you're in that position, now use your skill and athleticism and what we're coaching you to do to make a play and whatever, blah, blah, blah. So to your point, I do think to a lesser degree, the defensive coordinator is kind of like, okay, whoever, but they still need like legit players on the other side of the ball. But I was going to say, to Goody's point, like, I was watching First Take earlier, and Cam Newton, I'm going to paraphrase, pretty much like they were talking about the Eagles, and he was saying, like, when you're winning, everything's all fine and dandy, and like whatever little leaks get out the locker room is kind of just like, all right, whatever, like sweep it under the rug, we're winning. But when you're losing, that really shows the true character of your locker room. And you got guys like that are fractured in the Eagles locker room, and like Jalen Hurts versus AJ Brown and all the other stuff that's going on. And that made me think, like, okay, like, yeah, we had a losing season here, and like
Right.
there's all these reports about like there's S going on and this person's meddling and da da da. You don't hear no one in the locker room talking about like like negatively about the team, or you don't hear anyone talking negatively about the coaching staff.
Von Miller
Where
even
like
said that he wanted to come back, which is
exactly where
crazy.
you got Jalen Hurts kind of dodging questions about their OC as far as like do they want them to come back next year, dodging questions about Nick Sirianni. Whereas you look down here, they had a losing. They made the playoffs up there. You look down here, losing season, a whole bunch of ridiculousness going on reports wise, but inside that locker room, everyone still 100% fully supports DQ in that coaching staff. So that also might go
They
into a
they
word.
they even still sorry, they even still supported Cliff still. You
Yeah,
know, they
exactly.
were they
So
were they were drawn back by that. You know,
exactly.
openly
So
said that stuff. So sorry to cut you off, but the standard, the brotherhood, that stuff is real. I know we've heard culture and culture and culture for years and years and years and years. This guy, that guy, and the third. DQ really has something going on here, and I think it's way too valuable to again put him on the hot seat, even after another season of mediocre, football. I think it's still too soon, just because of that much value that he brings to this organization.
and look,
Sorry.
it's a result. Like you said, it's a result business. So like, does he probably got to win 7, 8 games next year to kind of keep his job? More than likely, yes. But I think that if he only wins 7, 8 games next year and like people are clamoring for his job, I think they're going to look towards the locker room and say like, hey, he still has support in the locker room. These guys are still playing for him, fighting for him. Let's give him year 4, and then obviously that'll be the hot seat year. But like I said, we'll see how it goes this year coming up, or this next year coming up.
And to your point about the Jimmies and Joes rather than the X's and O's, I hope Roe Chaser isn't watching this because he made that argument many times to me. And I understand what he is saying because ultimately, if you are a mechanic and somebody brings you a vehicle that's beat up, battered, and it needs a lot of work on it, if they're not willing to spend to get better parts, you can't really make that vehicle run. If they're telling you to use the same material, the same parts that you already on it, you can't really do all that much with it. It's hard to make that car run perfectly well unless you go get some new stuff. And ultimately, that's what the point that you're making about the Jimmies and Joes and X's and O's, and I ultimately agree with you in that sense. Now, Dog Tired said, my thought was maybe Bobby Johnson was Cliff's guy, but I was very confused, especially after the Blough hire. But I'm cool with it. He said Shanahan was 30 when he got to Washington, as well as Jags' current OC, who just took the Bills down to the wire in the playoffs. And he asked, was DQ's contract a 5-year deal, which I do believe it was. If you could look that up for me, that would be fantastic. I'd love you for it. Now, Goody, are you still here, brother?
I'm pretty sure him and AP got 5-year
Yes,
deals
sir.
together.
All right, so Goody, this question from the Colonel. Did Treylon Burks show anything that will decrease wide receiver as our top 2 needs in the 26th draft? The other being edge rusher.
Please repeat that question.
Did Treylon Burks show anything that will decrease wide receiver as one of our top 2 needs in the 2026 draft? The other being edge rusher.
Yes. How much? Can't really say. You have to say yes. The talent evaluators, the personnel people on this franchise, this organization, what they saw obviously before even bringing Treylon Burks in, there was obviously excitement there to see him actually get to work. They probably, there were some people in that room that were probably kind of like, I told you so. And some people are like, okay, I see what you're talking about. So in terms of decreasing that need or that want, I would say yes, decreases it. But how much, I'm not exactly sure because we know that what this team looked like without wide receiver or skill position players this season, right? When we were hampered, we didn't have enough depth in terms of people that we could put on the field week in and week out and still perform at a high level. So that's always going to be a pressing issue, no matter how you look at it. But again, to answer the question, yes, I think it does decrease it a little bit. I don't know how much. Treylon Burks was awesome, very exciting. It was one of the bright spots that we had this season. Seeing, us be able to pluck somebody that was kind of, washed up, old and forgotten about in his current initial situation in Tennessee.
Still young.
But we were able to, yeah, no, he's definitely still young. But he feels like he's been in the league for a while because we've all just heard about Traylon Burks in Tennessee, and there was nothing else behind it.
Right.
Besides his small, injury, past, but he was able to overcome that in Washington of all places, where everybody else was going down. So yeah, it definitely decreases it, but how much I'm not sure. Traylon Burks was awesome. Now I'm excited.
Yeah, and I will say this in pertaining to our last question with Tony Franchise, AP should be on the hot seat if he does bring in Brandon Ayuk and pay him a good amount of money. I do think that warrants being on
That was
the
a
hot
5-year
seat.
contract for DQ also.
Yeah. I will say this in pertaining to wide receiver, I respect Traylon Burks and what he's done here. And it is something that you want to go into next season with. You want to bring Traylon Burks back to say, okay, build on that. We want to keep you around. But that doesn't deter you from getting the room better. You want to stockpile that room. And I'm not saying, because I ultimately believe a strong running game and a good defense will help a young quarterback more than just playmakers. And I think evidence of this is Chicago and what they've done with Ben Johnson, with a solid, good running game with DeAndre Swift, with Kyle Managai, and also that defense being just turnover craziness. Even with the lack of accuracy from Caleb Williams, they're still a productive offense. And that's why I ultimately believe that the running game, the defense really helps out a young quarterback more. But you don't want to go into a position saying, oh, we saw some glimpses of this guy and what he could possibly bring. Let's just throw away the thought of getting better at wide receiver. No, if you have that ability, you do it. But there's other needs attributed that you have a need to have a starter there. And that's where I would put edge rusher above that. So like that, in my personal opinion, you want to go best player available, of course. You absolutely do. You don't know how much longer Terry's got in the tank. As much as I think that he is the new age Dale Green and playing into his 40s, I will say that you don't want to deter yourself away from that just by a few flashes from Traylon Burks. I think that we should get away from those days, because that's ultimately what Washington did this season. Is they came in saying, all right, we're good with Noah Brown. He did all right for us. And instead of trying to beef up that room. Obviously, they did bring in Debo. They drafted Jalen Lane, of course. But you don't want to handcuff yourself, so to speak. You want to be flexible, in my personal opinion.
What was the original question? I was looking at that contract.
Traylon Burks, did he show enough to basically decrease the need for wide receiver in the draft?
No. He definitely showed some good things. Definitely showed some flashes here and there. Definitely, like I said, showed what he didn't show in Tennessee. I was a fan of Traylon Burks coming out in the draft. I think he got kind of like a raw deal going into Tennessee, because as soon as he got there, they traded away A.J. Brown. So he was kind of looked at like, hey, you got to replace A.J. Brown now. And then he was constantly getting injured all the time. So it just everything kind of mounted up and piled up on him, and obviously eventually got him released. But yeah, he definitely showed enough flashes here to warrant him getting a look to come back into training camp and whatnot. Has to stay healthy. I know as soon as he got here, he had like finger surgery or something like that and was out for like a game or so. But yeah, he has to be able to stay healthy, stay on the field. And I think he could be a serviceable like wide receiver 3, maybe wide receiver 4, maybe give you 30, 40 catches, maybe somewhere around there. Maybe be a red zone threat. Like we all saw that crazy catch he made on the back of the end zone versus Denver. So could definitely be a good red zone threat. Seems like he's a really good willing blocker in the run game, which obviously if they want to run the ball more, they're going to need a guy like that. Big, physical, strong wide receiver.
Yeah, on that Bill touchdown run, his block on the inside
Yep.
on the DB was absolutely perfect.
Yep, and he's kind of the receiver build that we don't really have on the roster right now outside of like Terry. He's
Dude, you're in my head.
he's the bigger, kind of tall, like I said, the red zone, stronger, bigger physical threat that we need on this team that we've been lacking since Cam Sims has been on this roster. So yeah, but outside of that, like you still got to, like you said, you still got to get better in the receiver room. You're still going to need a guy that can grow into that eventual wide receiver 1 and take over for Terry whenever Terry decides to either move on or whenever they decide to move on from Terry. Either way, but yeah, you still need Terry. Look, we've been looking for a legit number 2 wide receiver or a 1A wide receiver opposite Terry since 2018 when he got here. Hopefully this will finally be the year. I know there's been hope for like Curtis Samuel or the hope for the Josh Dotsons of the world, but hopefully, and AP said it in their little end of the year presser that how can you prevent Jaden from insulate him from getting injured or like trying to do too much. He said by putting more better pieces around him on both sides of the ball. So hopefully, I mean, again, you can say it all you want, but you actually got to like actually do these things that you're talking about. So hopefully, that's going to be their number one priority, which is get a game changing defensive player, whether it's edge, Caleb Downs, whatever it may be. Get yourself a game changing defensive player, and then get yourself a game changing offensive player weapon to go alongside Terry in this offense, take him to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. Tim Towner in our Discord says former Arizona Cardinals head coach Jonathan Gannon is interviewing with the Commanders Thursday for their vacant defensive coordinator job. NFL Network insiders Ian Rappaport and Mike Garafolo reported. That was the one name that I have been talking about for a while, was Jonathan Gannon. I loved what he did in Arizona with that defense. Obviously, they get more pieces to help him, but we were at that week 1 opening game against Arizona when that defense was legitimately surprising to us and how good they were in his first year. They had a very good command of that defense, and I like the way that he deployed them and kind of forcing you in pressured situations. I think Jonathan Gannon would be a very good hire for Washington, and that's somebody that's obviously aggressive, doesn't do a great job of public speaking, but that's the last thing on my mind. We just had a great public speaking defensive coordinator here with a very bad defense, so maybe the inverse could be good for Washington. The next question. I was
at that game too, actually.
Yeah.
Funny. Yep.
Now that Tim Towner, have any of you heard of Parker Washington before yesterday? He said, I had never. And do you think McCaffrey could become that?
Yes, I'm familiar with Parker Washington because I've watched the Jags, all season. De'Ami Brown over there kind of got a little put on the back burner. But Parker last night was definitely on my ticket, and I got a text message from one of my friends after I sent him a screenshot, and he sent me a text message, maybe 20 minutes later saying he was in a concussion protocol or something like that, and I was like, I just responded, "Yep, of course," because I had him on my ticket, but he did come back out, and he did, this guy's been phenomenal. I don't know what round he was drafted in, but that's the good thing about this league. When you find these guys that emerge out of nowhere, and that's why you can't really get too hyped up in all the draft talk and how many picks you have and how high you're picking, all that stuff, because these players are littered throughout the class. So Parker Washington, I did know about him prior, but yeah, he's starting to definitely take the spotlight with his performance.
Okay, so I have had this argument about quarterbacks with Hall for many years. About, he obviously is incessant on Washington getting more playmakers at wide receiver to help with the quarterback position. And I understand the argument. They brought in De'Ami Brown. They have Brian Thomas Jr. They did pretty well with adding some tools there. But you see how somebody like Parker Washington, who you had never heard of, Tim, before yesterday's games, ball out for them in a playoff game, in a very important game, right? It comes down to the quarterback position. If you have a good quarterback will make a wide receiver. I've said this many times. Davante Adams was not Davante Adams his first couple years in the NFL. It did take him a little bit, but the relationship with quarterback matched with the talents of that wide receiver is what ultimately breeds a fantastic relationship and productivity. And I would love to see Washington do that. And I think Luke McCaffrey could ultimately be Parker Washington. I do. He's shown up in big times when we needed him, but it takes time. And Parker Washington is in his third year. Luke McCaffrey is coming up on his third year. It's a pivotal year for Luke McCaffrey to showcase his abilities. It sucks that he got hurt, but ultimately, I think if you would put the doubt in there, you'd put it in the quarterback position. Does the quarterback position, does he hamper you at all from being able to get to that ceiling for that wide receiver? And ultimately, I don't fear that with Jaden Daniels. So I do think that Luke could be that guy.
Parker Washington with a 6th round pick, 2023.
Puka was a 5th round pick. So, we just had this argument of, do we want to always be like, oh, we got Jaden Daniels, he can make everyone better. It doesn't matter, because they did that this year, and we saw the results. But to your point, he had Zacchaeus, and he had, to a certain extent, De'Ami Brown, and obviously he elevated those guys. So
Jamison Crowder.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, he took guys and elevated them. Yes, I know that. But why do we always got to, like, Why do was be like? Why can't we get a guy that elevates Jaden Daniels? Why is it always like the opposite? We've been in that mindset for like so many years now. It's like we don't need this guy, we don't need that guy. We need better quarterback play.
It's similar to what you would make the argument for Puka Nacua. If Puka didn't have Matthew Stafford, would Puka be Puka right now? Given that he's a superstar, you would say.
I think he still would be Puka because a lot of what Puka does is because of Sean McVay. It's not because of Matthew Stafford.
No, it's because of the targets
When
that
Matthew
he's
Stafford
getting.
leaves, when Matthew Stafford retires, Puka will still be Puka.
I don't think so. I really don't
When
think so.
Devontae Adams leaves Aaron Rodgers, he's still Devontae Adams and leads the league in touchdowns, but multiple different teams.
Well, and Devontae.
That's my point.
And well, Devontae
You need
did.
talented players. You don't always got to have the quarterback elevate the mid players.
I understand that, but Devontae was not really Devontae with the Jets. It wasn't
course, it
until
took
he
him a
got
while.
with Matthew Stafford is when he started blossoming again. Right? It has to do because it's a feeder. The quarterback feeds the wide receivers. If you have a good arm,
He didn't have a quarterback. He had Aaron Rodgers for like 5 games with them, 6 games, whatever it was.
well, right,
in
and
New
they
York.
had Garrett Wilson as well, and that offense was inept ultimately.
Yeah, but you had Zach Wilson throwing in the ball.
Well, Aaron was there too, and Aaron was force feeding Devontae. We know that by now.
Yeah, because anyway, to the question. I didn't know who Parker Washington was only because I'm heavily into fantasy football, and once Travis Hunter went down, there was like he was one of like the big waiver wire guys. So I didn't know like his whole background. I knew he was like a late round pick. I didn't know what year he was in. I thought it was maybe like his second year in the league, but apparently his third year. I guess he went to Penn State. But yeah, I knew who he was just like because I'm heavily into fantasy. But to your point and to the question, can Luke McCaffrey become Parker Washington? I think that he was kind of on his way to do that. Like you saw the flashes of Luke kind of growing as a receiver. He's already carved out his role as a special teams player, but you saw he was getting more reps on the field with Terry being out. He was starting to make plays. He was catching touchdowns, becoming a reliable target. So hopefully going into year 3, he will be taking that next step that Parker Washington did. And it also goes to show you that you just need reps on the field. You need your chance to get on the field because he was never really getting on the field because they had Brian Thomas, they had Travis Hunter, and guys like that. The guy gets injured, next man up mentality.
It's crazy.
All of a sudden,
right?
Parker Washington is But also, we're hyping up Parker Washington like he's like a number 1 receiver. Like let's chill a little bit.
Well,
Like he's still only like
I would make the same argument for Mitchell Tinsley and others.
he's still like a 3-catch, like 40-yard guy. He's not like turning into like Justin
But
Jefferson or like taking over the league.
He has that force feed kind of style where he can be like fed the ball and the defense just can't stop him. He'll just be open all the time.
So to give context to Hall and I's argument, it's pertaining to using a lot of assets, either cap or draft selection. And I would say that high I guess asset you would use is a top 10 pick on a wide receiver. And that's ultimately where this argument derives from, and me saying that you could go in later round in drafts and get somebody if you have the feeder to help. And that's why I'm saying Parker Washington. The one I would use to buffer my argument is Garrett Wilson with New York. You know, you have Garrett Wilson. Is he elevating the quarterback play, right? And that's ultimately where you like rely on to say it is the feeder. It is the most important aspect first and foremost. And I understand Hall's point of wanting to make it easier on Jaden from a wide receiver perspective.
But you're talking about a number 1 receiver in Garrett Wilson who's getting the coverage rolled his way as opposed to Parker Washington, who's basically just getting man coverage because he's like the number 3 receiver.
Exactly. I understand.
I mean, honestly, Parker Washington was on that team for 3 seasons, and their head coach was there. This is his first year, or is his second year?
Liam Cohen, this is his first year.
Cohen, his first year. So, I mean, the guy was on the roster for 2 years, never really kind of was utilized. And then you have somebody else bring him in and kind of bring him, utilize his strength.
Yeah, not only just quarterback play, but scheme can also elevate a guy as well.
Yeah,
just like
for sure.
I know a lot of people would say that Jaden elevated OZ and Diami, guys like that. I would also say that the scheme elevated those guys because you look at
Kyle
OZ.
Shanahan's not walking through that door.
Yeah, of course. Not every. I'm saying it can be the quarterback or the scheme or both. Because you look at a guy like OZ right now out or Diami out in Jacksonville, healthy scratch. For a guy like Parker Washington, OZ out in Chicago, he's like the fourth guy on the depth chart. He makes plays here and there, but last year he
He's
was our
he's he's
number 3 or
he's
whatever he was.
vital. He's been vital in Chicago this year. All of his little appearances, OZ, because I always see it. I'm just like, man, that's our guy, and he's doing what
Yeah.
he did here,
Yeah.
and it's pretty kind of cool how they identify a player to do those certain things, and only some people are cut out for that.
Yep. Now, the last question we have in the Discord is from Deluxe. Hall, where do you think they find the QB coach? Important hire for current and succession planning.
So I know they're requested an interview with I forgot the guy's name. I was looking at it a little bit ago, but he's the assistant quarterback coach in Carolina right now under Dave Canales and working with Bryce Young. I forget who the quarterback coach is, but yeah, he's the assistant quarterback coach. So like obviously he would get an elevated role here as being the quarterback coach. He's worked with Jaden Daniels back at Arizona State, so he has ties to Jaden, more familiarity, more comfortability with Jaden for Jaden. So it wouldn't surprise me. He's a young guy too. Like I think he's like 31, 32. So they're leaning into everyone said they got the oldest roster in the league. Well, guess what? Now they're completely flipping it. They're going way young on offensive side of the ball. So yeah, I'm not gonna assume he's gonna get the job because there could be other candidates that are gonna get interviews. But for David Blough, I think David Blough will work with him before in Arizona, maybe at some point like that. But yeah, he knows Jaden Daniels, worked with Jaden Daniels before, so I would assume they're trying to get more comfortability with Jaden, more familiarity with Jaden. So he seems like a guy that could be ready for that role.
Yeah, I do wonder what's going to
I'm
go
gonna
on.
look his name up real quick.
I do wonder what's going to go on with Pete Carroll. To be perfectly honest with you, Pete Carroll, wherever he goes, linebacker play balls out. With
Mike Bercovici, assistant quarterback coach with
in Carolina.
Panthers.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring him up. I know that we were interviewing him for the quarterback coaching job, and obviously what he's done with Bryce Young is phenomenal. Is it how much of it goes into what he's done to get Bryce Young to where he's at, right? But ultimately, like a hire like that, it's a smart one. You want the relativity. You want David Blough being confident in his quarterback coach being able to execute what he wants to do. And I think this is one of the assets of having a young guy like David Blough, a former NFL player, where he can tap into that fountain, into that water pipeline of former players that played the position that he knows are very, very good at structurally getting guys sound, getting guys the ball out of their hands on time, and protecting themselves. And I think that David Blough, that's one asset of having somebody like David Blough there for you. I'm not sure about other names because of how many connections there are in the NFL, but I would just say let's just enjoy the ride, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got to. What's the dude on Twitter? T Mesh or whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
Ramesh.
Yeah, he's always like connecting. Like Dan Quinn coached at Hofstra, who knows this guy, who knows this guy, who knows this guy. Their circles around to like this guy could be a candidate. So if you want to check his feed out on Twitter or something like that, he's a guy that always makes connections. But yeah, I'm gonna assume it's gonna be guys that have connections to like David Blough when he was in Arizona or Detroit, or guys that have had previous like stints with like Jaden Daniels throughout college or something like that. To kind of, like I said, build that familiarity and cultivation around Jaden again, like he's had for the last couple of years.
And ultimately, I really want somebody that will push Jaden Daniels. Like as much as the VR, and I trust Jaden in getting better on a daily, hourly basis, you do want that extra pushing to make sure. And I think a lot of it with Tavita, I think a lot of it has to do with Marcus Mariota. So that quarterback change, what's going to happen there? What's going to happen with Marcus? Time will tell, my friends. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap us up for this episode. If you've made it this far, you're a frickin' champion. Thank you to Dog Tired, who tuned in and sent in some things. He wrote in that he said time to learn Malachi Lemon Boys, the wide receiver from USC. I think he's like 5'10", 5'11", just an absolute playmaker. Troy Polamalu version from a wide receiver perspective. Really was an all-around wide receiver for them. He also said Parker Washer is a 6th rounder out of Penn State. He says that QB wide receiver relationship, Adams/Carr, was a great combination because they were college roommates, which is why he lobbied to be traded to Vegas in the first place. And then Parker Washington equals Wan'Dale Robinson, basically. And
he's also a free agent as well, so that's definitely a name to watch also.
Wan'Dale.
Yeah, not a fan. Not a fan.
He's not bad, man. He's not
bad. I'm just not a fan. He's not bad. He's good.
I'm not a fan of like the smaller, shorter, kind of like shifty, twitchy guys, but I will say, when he was in Arizona, I was not really a big fan of his, but he's definitely made a name for himself in New York because he's gone over 1,000 yards, I think, either this year or last year, one of these 2 years. But he's one of them guys where like you don't really like think of him in like a high regard, but you look at his stats, you're like, oh damn, like 70 catches for over 1,000 yards, like what the hell?
Oh yeah, without Malik Neighbors, they relied heavily on Wan'Dale, and he came through for them, and they'd be stupid to let him walk. You got to bring him back to help Jackson Dart and get that offense running. But look, we'll see what happens when it comes to free agency. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap us up for this episode. If you made it this far, you're a freaking champion. Thank you, Dog Tired. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Tony Franchise, Tim Towner, Deluxe. I appreciate your guys' submissions for this episode. My wife and I are going on a little trip this week, so tomorrow's my Friday, going to Gettysburg to be able to visit the battlefield, and I'm going to be a little makeshift guide for my wife and how everything played out there. But very excited to be able to spend some days off up in PA, be able to experience that. So we'll see you guys later on in the week. Stay tuned for it. I'll let you know when it's coming down the pipeline. Appreciate all you guys. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm Kyle.
I'm Hull.
Goody.
And we'll see you guys again later on this week. Washington football. Woo! What's up, everyone? This is Kyle from the Burgundy Zone. We are releasing our own merch to support the show. If you want to rock the Burgundy Zone logo or you want to see Reed's face on your shirt, we got it. We're starting with t-shirts, hoodies, and zip-up. So if you're a fan of the show, make sure you snag one before they are gone. Check out the link in our bio on Instagram